That's the first thought that crossed my mind when I stepped into her hallway, still damp from the drizzle outside. She'd only asked if I could help her move a few old boxes from storage, something quick, something simple. At least that's what I told myself while pretending my pulse wasn't already doing its own thing just being near her. Her name was Evelyn. 45, recently widowed, and the kind of woman who made silence feel intentional. She never raised her voice, never rushed a sentence, but somehow every word she spoke made me feel like I'd been personally chosen to hear it. And when she opened her door that evening, barefoot, with a loose cardigan sliding off one shoulder and her hair half-tied like she'd given up finishing it, I forgot every excuse I'd rehearsed to avoid staying too long. "You're early," she said, but she didn't sound bothered. Her eyes did a slow sweep over me, my damp shirt, the bag slung across my back, the drops clinging to my hair. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." Her house always smelled faintly like vanilla and old books. Tonight there was something warmer, maybe cinnamon, maybe just the way her skin held on to heat. The air inside felt different from the hallway, too still, like the place had been quiet too long and only came alive once someone else walked into it. She gestured upstairs. "Boxes are in the attic." "I'd go with you but, the ladder and I don't get along." I managed a nod, even though I caught the way her hand touched the banister as she said it, light, almost absent. Her wedding ring was gone, but sometimes she still rubbed the place it used to be. She probably didn't even know she was doing it. As I climbed the narrow stairs, I felt her presence behind me, not because she followed but because I kept waiting for her voice again. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, and the sound echoed in the quiet house. Halfway up, I glanced back, no reason, just instinct, and found her at the bottom, watching me with one hand wrapped around her arm. When our eyes met, she dropped her gaze, like she'd been caught somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. The attic door stuck before it opened, old paint catching against old wood. I pushed my shoulder into it, and it gave with a sigh of dust and shadows. The warm light from the hallway stretched across the floorboards but didn't quite touch the corners. 3 boxes sat near a trunk, nothing dramatic, nothing that explained the heaviness in the room. "I'll take them down one at a time," I called over my shoulder. "Wait," she said. I turned. She'd followed me up after all, stopping at the top of the stairs like she wasn't sure if she meant to. Her eyes flicked over the space, then to me. "Be careful. Those steps are older than both of us." There was a smile in her voice, but not on her lips. I lifted the first box, heavier than it looked, and brushed past her on the way down. Or I meant to. The attic was narrow, the air warmer, and her body was closer than I expected. My arm skimmed hers, just a second of contact, but she inhaled softly like she'd been caught off guard, or remembering something. "Sorry," I murmured. "It's fine," she said, but her voice was low, softer than before. She didn't move right away. On the landing, I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, something clean and expensive. When she stepped down ahead of me, the hem of her cardigan brushed my hand, deliberate or accidental, I couldn't tell. The house felt smaller suddenly, every stair echoing the space between us. By the time the second box was downstairs, neither of us had said much. But everything unsaid hung louder than the words. She stood by the kitchen archway, fingers curled around the frame, watching me with that unreadable restraint she wore like perfume. "You sure you don't want to stay a little longer?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, before I could even breathe in the question, someone knocked on the front door. And she didn't move. The knock at the door didn't stop her from looking at me first. Just for a second, she stayed there, hand on the kitchen archway, shoulders angled toward me like she hadn't fully decided whether to answer it at all. Then something shifted in her eyes, a quiet return to caution, and she pulled her cardigan tighter as she stepped away. "I'll get it," she said, though her voice had lost the warmth from moments earlier. I stayed by the stairs, the box still in my hands, pretending not to listen as she opened the door. A neighbor's voice carried faintly through the hallway, polite, older, asking about mail, or trash bins, or something that didn't matter. Evelyn's replies were clipped, composed, almost too calm. I couldn't see her face, but I knew the version she'd put on. I'd seen it before when people from the building spoke to her, gentle, cordial, but guarded in that way people get after life takes something from them. Her husband had died 3 years before I moved in. Car accident, sudden. People told me because small buildings trade information like currency. I never asked her about it. She never spoke of him. But his picture sat on a shelf in the living room until a few weeks ago, when it quietly disappeared. No explanation, no replacement. When the door closed again, she didn't speak immediately. She walked back slowly, almost as if rehearsing who she was supposed to be before re-entering the room. "You can leave the last box upstairs," she said without meeting my eyes. "It's just old clothes." I set the one I was carrying down by the wall, dragging out the motion longer than necessary. "I don't mind finishing it." "I didn't ask if you mind," she said, but the edge in her tone was thin, breakable. She realized it, too. Don't overdo it. You've already helped enough." There were 100 normal responses I could have given. I chose none of them. I wasn't in a rush to leave. That made her look at me. Not surprised, more like reluctant to believe I meant it. Her gaze held mine a little too long, like she was searching for the part of me that would eventually retreat. "You're young," she said, barely above a murmur. "People your age don't spend Friday nights moving boxes for women twice their age." "It's not like that." She gave a quiet breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "No? Then how is it?" I didn't answer, because saying it out loud would turn whatever this was into something real, something we'd have to acknowledge. Instead, I stepped closer to pick up the second box. My fingers brushed hers on the lid, light, unintended, but neither of us pulled away immediately. Her skin was warm. Her breath stilled. She was the first to move, a subtle retreat like she didn't want it to be noticeable. "I should make tea," she said, turning toward the kitchen. "Or something." She didn't ask if I wanted any. She just said it like it was safer than silence. I followed slowly, not sure if I was supposed to. The kitchen light was low, the kind of yellow glow that softened everything. She reached for a mug on the top shelf and stood on her toes without thinking. Instinct made me step forward. "Here," I said, already close enough to catch the mug before she dropped it. Her hand hovered in midair when I reached past her, my arm brushing along her shoulder. She inhaled, shallow, controlled, like she didn't want me to hear it. "I'm not breakable," she muttered, but she didn't step away. "I know." When I lowered the mug onto the counter, my hand grazed the small of her back, light, barely contact, but real. She stilled, her fingers curling slightly around the edge of the counter. The silence around us wasn't empty this time. It was thick, charged, waiting. She didn't turn around. I didn't move my hand away fast enough. And that pause, just that breath of stillness, felt like the beginning of something neither of us could pretend not to feel anymore. The kettle hadn't even started boiling, but the room felt warmer than it should have. She stayed facing the counter, pretending to look for tea bags in the drawer, though her hand hadn't moved in at least 10 seconds. My hand was no longer at her back, but the ghost of the touch was still there, on both of us. I stepped away first, but not far. Just enough space to pretend it hadn't happened. "You don't have to stay," she said, voice steady but too soft. "I know you have things to do." I watched the faint tremor in her fingers as she picked up the mug. "I didn't say I was leaving." She turned at that, slowly, cautiously. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there earlier. Not invitation exactly, but not rejection either. Something caught between want and warning. Before either of us spoke again, her phone buzzed on the counter. The sound snapped the air in half. She hesitated before reaching for it, and the screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. A man's name. Not her husband. Not family. She swiped the notification away without opening it. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. But the moment shifted, the kind of shift you feel behind your ribs. She wrapped her fingers around the mug even though it was still empty. "People talk in this building. More than they should. that bother you?" "It should," she said. "You live downstairs. I'm your landlady." She stopped herself before finishing. "Older," I said for her. Not as an accusation. Just a fact she thought she needed to protect us from. She didn't argue. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that waited for one of us to take a step we couldn't undo. I moved first this time, closing the distance to pick up the box I'd left by the wall, though we both knew I wasn't focused on the box. She shifted too, brushing past me to reach for the kettle switch. Her arm grazed mine, intentional or not. It didn't feel accidental. The brush was soft, a barely there contact, but my heartbeat answered before my thoughts could. She noticed. She pretended not to. I set the box down again, uselessly. She faced me now, one hand resting on the edge of the counter for balance or distance, I couldn't tell which. "You keep looking at me like that," she said quietly, "and someone is going to get the wrong idea." "Is it wrong?" The words were out before I filtered them. Her breath caught. Not loud. Just enough to feel. "I'm not asking for that answer," she said, but she didn't back away. A clatter from the hallway made both of us turn. A door slammed downstairs, someone from another apartment coming in or out. We froze, neither of us breathing for a moment. She stepped closer instead of away. Not enough to call it a decision, but enough to feel her warmth. "You should go before," she didn't finish, because I was already close. Not touching, not quite. The space between us felt thinner than the air itself. Her eyes dropped to my mouth for half a second, half a heartbeat, before she caught herself and looked away. "I shouldn't," she whispered. I almost asked why. I almost closed the last inches between us. But something, fear, decency, timing, held me where I stood. The kettle clicked off behind her. Neither of us moved. And even without touching, we were standing closer than we'd ever been. Closer than we had any right to be, closer than either of us knew how to step away from. ChatGPT said, the kettle clicked off, but neither of us moved to pour anything. The air between us stayed tight, charged, like a held breath stretched too long. She was still facing me, one hand braced on the counter, and my body was close enough that I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was the first to speak, though her voice sounded like she had to push it through something heavy. "This can't happen." The words were meant to end something, but she didn't step back when she said them. If anything, her fingers curled just slightly against the counter, like she needed the anchor. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "You keep saying that. But you don't move." Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and exposed for a second. "Because I don't trust myself to." That landed somewhere deep in my ribs. I didn't touch her. Not yet. But the space between us kept collapsing without either of us doing anything. I could feel the warmth radiating off her skin, feel the shift in her breathing when I leaned in just a little. "I'm not playing a game," I said, quiet but steady. She gave a breathy, almost bitter laugh. "You think that's what scares me?" I watched her hand, how it loosened from the counter slowly, like she'd only just noticed she was still gripping it. She ran that same hand through her hair, pushing it back from her face, but a few strands fell forward again. Before I could think better of it, I reached up and brushed them away. She froze. My fingers barely grazed her temple, but she went still in that arrested way people do when instinct and control collide. Her eyes didn't leave mine. She didn't tell me to stop. "You don't get to look at me like that," she whispered, not moving an inch. "Like what?" "Like you want to." I didn't drop my hand yet. "What if I do?" She exhaled so quietly it might have been mistaken for silence. "Then you're going to regret it." "I won't." The air between us tightened again, so thick it felt physical. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, she turned away, not fully, just enough that she could breathe without my gaze pinning her in place. She tried to walk past me, but I shifted instinctively, blocking her without touching her. Her shoulder brushed mine, slow and unwanted only in theory. "You think I haven't thought about it," she said, voice low and raw. "You think I don't," she caught herself, but too late. The truth was already out in the open, even if unfinished. I stepped closer. Not reckless. Not rushed. Just close enough that her back lightly grazed the counter behind her and she had nowhere else to go. The smell of her skin, vanilla, warmth, something entirely her, wrapped itself around me. "Tell me you don't want this," I said. "And I'll walk downstairs and pretend none of this ever happened." Her throat worked, but no lie came out. Instead, she closed her eyes. And that was worse, because it wasn't refusal. It was surrender edged with fear. When she opened them again, something in her restraint had fractured. "This ruins everything," she said. "Or it starts something." She didn't push me away. She didn't move at all when I leaned in, slow enough to stop if she asked, close enough that my breath grazed the side of her neck. I felt the slight tremor in her fingers when they brushed against my shirt, not quite gripping, not quite letting go. Then, a sound. A creak in the hallway. Someone walking past her front door. Both of us turned our heads instinctively, breath held, bodies still too close to be accidental. The footsteps faded. She looked back at me. Neither of us stepped away. And then she said, barely above a breath, "If you touch me, I won't be able to pretend anymore." Her words were still hanging between us. "If you touch me, I won't be able to pretend anymore," when someone knocked on her door for the second time that night. A firm, familiar rhythm. Not impatient. Just certain. She flinched, not a full step back, just a sharp breath and a shift in her shoulders. Whatever was about to happen between us snapped into suspension. I saw her pulse jump at her throat. "Stay here," she whispered. She didn't wait for me to agree. She moved toward the door with quick, quiet steps, running a hand through her hair in a way that looked practiced, wiping away the evidence of something that hadn't even fully happened. I stayed where I was, heart still beating too close to my skin. I could see part of the entryway from where I stood near the kitchen, just enough to hear the creak of the door and catch the voice that followed. Male. Calm. Too familiar. "Evelyn? You didn't answer my text." Her body stiffened, the kind of reaction no one else would have noticed unless they were watching as closely as I was. She held the edge of the door, not opening it all the way. "I was busy," she said, tone controlled. "Doing what?" The man stepped forward slightly, his voice lowering. I couldn't see his face, but I could hear the kind of certainty that came from history. "I've called twice this week." She hesitated. "Just one beat too long." "I told you, I'm not having this conversation again." "I didn't come to argue," he said. "I came because I still have a key." I heard the jangle of metal in his hand. Her entire body went still. I watched her free hand close around something only she could feel. "You don't live here anymore, Daniel." Daniel. The name from the phone screen. He lowered his voice. "I never stopped, don't," she cut in, barely above a whisper. "Not here." It wasn't anger. It wasn't longing either. It was something messier, something she hadn't given him permission to speak into existence. I heard him exhale, then take a step back. "At least tell me if someone's with you." I felt her glance, felt it even without seeing it. She didn't turn her head, but the pause was enough. "No one you need to worry about," she said. "Not no one. Not I'm alone. No one you need to worry about." Daniel let out a sound, frustration, maybe disbelief. A chair scraped upstairs in another apartment, masking the silence that followed. Then his voice came again, lower now. "You're not ready to move on. We both know that." She didn't reply. A moment later, the door closed, not slammed, just pressed shut with care. The lock turned. Her shoulders slumped for half a second before she straightened and walked back toward the kitchen. Her steps were steady. Her breathing wasn't. When she finally looked at me, she didn't explain. I didn't ask. But something had shifted, something neither of us could unknow now. "You heard," she said. Not a question. I didn't try to. "I know." She moved past me, brushing my arm with hers. The contact was small but sharp, like electricity trapped under skin. She reached for the kettle again, even though it had already cooled. "He was my husband's closest friend," she said quietly, not turning around. "He stayed around after the funeral. Too long. I let him think, more than I should have." I swallowed whatever reaction tried to surface. Her voice dropped further. "He doesn't know you live downstairs. Not no one knows about you. Not it doesn't matter. Just that." I stepped closer. Not touching her. Just enough to feel the pull. "Does it change anything?" I asked. She turned then, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes were unreadable, but not distant. "It changes everything," she said. But she didn't step away. The silence after her words wasn't empty, it throbbed between us, thick with all the things neither of us had dared name. "It changes everything." But she hadn't moved away. She hadn't closed the distance either. She just stood there, looking at me like she was bracing for impact. I didn't touch her. Not yet. I just stepped close enough that I could feel the faint rise and fall of her breathing. Close enough that if either of us swayed even slightly, something irreversible would happen. "You don't have to decide tonight," I said quietly. That earned the smallest flicker of disbelief from her, like I'd said the wrong thing and the right thing at the same time. "If I don't," she murmured, "then I already have." Her voice had changed. It wasn't as steady as before. The wall she always kept between us, the polite, careful distance, was still there, but so thin now I could see the shape of her real self behind it. I lifted a hand, slowly, so she could stop me if she wanted to. My fingers brushed a strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. Light. Barely a touch. But I felt the way she held her breath. "You're trembling," I said. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered back. But she didn't deny the trembling. I let my thumb rest just below her ear, not pressing, only a whisper of contact. Her eyes dropped to my mouth, then snapped back to my face like she'd caught herself. "If this goes any further," she said, "I won't be able to pretend it was a mistake. That's not what I want. You don't know what you're giving up. Maybe I've already chosen." Her lips parted, not from surprise, for something closer to recognition. Like I'd spoken a truth she'd been trying not to see. She took in a breath, and I felt it against my chest though we weren't touching anywhere else. "All evening," she said, barely above a hush, "I kept telling myself I was imagining this. That you were being kind. That I was reading into things. You weren't. And this," she went on, her voice thinning with something fragile, "this is the part where I'm supposed to walk away before it's too late." She didn't move. "And are you going to?" I asked. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was learning my face for the first time. There was fear there, yes, but something deeper than that. Something that looked like relief. "No," she said. The word was quiet. Certain. Barely formed, and all the permission I needed. I didn't lunge or pull her in. I just moved the last inch between us until her forehead rested against mine. Her breath mingled with mine, unsteady and warm. My hand slid to the side of her neck, the skin soft beneath my palm, her pulse tapping against my fingers like a signal. She closed her eyes, not to shut me out, but to steady herself. When she spoke, it was the softest confession. "I haven't let anyone hold me since he died." I didn't answer with words. I just let my other hand find hers, fingers intertwining in a way that felt both impossible and inevitable. She squeezed back, only once, but it was enough. Her next breath shook as she exhaled against my jaw. "If you kiss me," she said, voice trembling and sure all at once, "don't you dare make it something I can forget." I didn't promise her anything. I just leaned in, slow enough for her to stop me, close enough that every inch of restraint went taut as wire, and let the moment break the way it was always going to. Not with a clash, but with the quiet, undeniable certainty of two people who had finally stopped pretending. Her lips were still warm against mine when we finally broke apart, not because the moment faded, but because neither of us wanted to rush whatever came next. She stayed close, close enough that her breath still mingled with mine. My hands were still at her waist, hers lightly resting against my chest like she was testing what it felt like to be held again. No words at first. Just quiet. A new kind of quiet, not heavy or uncertain, but full. She didn't step back. If anything, she leaned in a little more, her forehead coming to rest against the curve of my shoulder. I felt the way she exhaled, like her body was releasing something it had been braced against for a long time. I thought, she said softly, that if I ever did this, I'd feel guilty. And now? I asked. She hesitated, not in doubt, but in honesty. Now I just feel scared. But not the kind that makes me want to run. I shifted just enough to see her face. She let me, her eyes lifting to meet mine. There was vulnerability there, but no apology. You don't have to justify any of this to me, I said. She gave the faintest smile, real, unguarded, gone almost as soon as it appeared but no less true. I know. That's what makes it harder to fight. She brushed a thumb over the back of my hand, like she was memorizing the shape of it. Then she threaded her fingers through mine, firm and deliberate. Not shy. Not unsure. I spent years wondering if wanting something for myself made me disloyal to the life I had before, she murmured. But I'm tired of living like I owe grief more devotion than I owe the rest of my life. I squeezed her hand gently. You deserve something that's yours again. She huffed out a breath, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. You're so young to understand that. Maybe, I said, but I understand you. She looked at me then, really looked, and whatever resistance was left finally gave way. She closed the final inch between us and rested against me, her body fitting into mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. My arms came around her without thought. We stood like that for a while, no rush, no pretending there was somewhere else we needed to be. The storm outside had started to fade, the windows dark and still. The kettle on the stove had long gone silent. She was the one who moved first, though only slightly. Her voice was soft when she spoke again. This doesn't have to be complicated, she said. We don't owe anyone an explanation but ourselves. I nodded. Then let's not apologize for it. Her fingers played with mine once before she lifted her head and pressed a slow kiss to the edge of my jaw, not hungry, not hesitant. Just sure. I don't want to go back downstairs tonight, I admitted, the words barely above a whisper. She didn't flinch. Then don't. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic promise, just her hand still in mine, her body settled comfortably against me like she'd decided she didn't need to keep her distance anymore. I pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, and she closed her eyes, not in fear, but in peace. The kind that comes when a choice stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like the truth. When she finally spoke, her voice had a quiet certainty to it. We'll figure it out, she said. And I'm not going to pretend I don't want this. You don't have to, I said. She laced our fingers tighter, as if anchoring the moment in place. There was no confusion left. No pretending. Just the warmth of her leaning into me and the quiet understanding that whatever came next, this was the beginning of it.